in the first panel, as well as now. And so let me go back. Maybe most importantly, I am the father of two intelligent, beautiful Black girls. And so like many of you, I am personally invested in this conference, in this topic, and in the work of this center. And so again, glad to have you all and looking forward to a great presentation from our presenters today. First, we have Dr. Dara Lewis. Just a second, Dr. Lewis, my apologies. Dr. Lewis is the Associate Director for the Center for Research on Self-Sufficiency at Loyola University in Chicago. We will also have a presentation from Philip Hong. My apologies if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Philip Hong is the director of that same center, Center for Research on Self-Sufficiency at Loyola, and Mr. Ed Davies, who is Director of Community Initiatives and the Director of the Power of Fathers initiative, which will be the focus of the presentation today. He's also with Children's Home and Aid, located in Chicago. So Chi-Town represented very strongly in this session. We will definitely protect some time after the presenters give some remarks for Q&A. As was mentioned in the first, before we came to the breakout, I will be monitoring the chat. Please put your questions in the chat. When we start the Q&A, I will go there, but I would also like, if folks want to come on and ask a particular question, once you're recognized, come off camera, come off mute, ask your question, and then go back off audio and video. So I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Lewis, who is going to get us started today. Dr. Lewis.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McGregor. And really, I'm just going to hand off to Ed Davies, who will begin our presentation.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. I'm happy to be here to talk about our work here in Chicago in partnership with Loyola University of Chicago, our evaluation research partner for Power of Fathers. And wanted to just share a bit, give a brief overview of the program and how it's evolved, and then go into turning it back to Philip and Dara to talk about the research side of things and the impact of this work and how that's setting us up for where we're moving to. So Power Fathers started back in 2016 as a partnership with the four social service agencies you see on here, based in Chicago: Fathers, Families, Healthy Communities, Family Focus, Metropolitan Family Services, and my organization, Children's Home and Aid. And we collaboratively came together to pool our resources, not only funding, but also our staff resources, our programmatic resources, to figure out a way how we can collectively support fathers primarily in two areas within Chicago: on the south side in the greater Inglewood area, and on the west side in North Lawndale, two communities historically having low outcomes for families of color, low outcomes for the community in general. And so we wanted to focus our efforts there, but also work with dads from across the Chicagoland area, across Cook County, and beyond. And so the overall purpose of the initiative, and tying this back to some of what we heard earlier, was we figured we wanted to improve outcomes primarily for children by making sure that we are stabilizing, improving outcomes for their fathers. So how can we have fathers not be the missing link in terms of supporting their children, and supporting their families, and supporting their communities? And our approach to doing that was focusing on how we are stabilizing, supporting, and helping fathers achieve the things that they needed to in their lives so that they're in a position to help others. So the program worked on a three-tiered level, because we recognized that just focusing on the individual alone was not going to get us to where we needed to be. We needed to focus on the organizations that fathers engage with. We also need to focus on the systems that tend to have an adverse impact on fathers and their families. So Those were the 3 tiers of our program model. Is how do we help the men deal with the issues that they need to deal with related to who they were as individuals, their role as fathers, their role as co-parents and as community members, but also how do we improve the practices of organizations like the 4 organizations that were in this partnership, but across the social constructs like the agency, the public service agencies, as well as the private agencies within communities, in strengthening their practice. So how do we learn from what we're doing as 4 organizations focus on this work and spread that learning to other agencies? And then finally, using the voice of not only the experience of our staff in the organizations that do this work, but also the voices of our fathers and their families to inform what types of policies need to be addressed. Everything from, not surprisingly, child support reform policies, but also things like, everyday things like fathers who are trying to access, information at their kids' school and getting the runaround because it's the father asking versus the mother asking. We have custodial fathers who are trying to access social services and benefits much in the same way that mothers do to support their children, but facing a much steeper climb up that hill than mothers do because of the fact that they're fathers. So it's not only policies and systems as they're written, it's also how they're enforced that we've seen have had an impact on our fathers. So when we start this work, we wanted fathers to be able to focus on how they build their power. And for them, we felt that their power is rooted in 3 things, like knowing their person, knowing their place, and knowing their purpose. And so 1, helping them identify who they are and how do they show up as they do. It's primarily in our program, it's about 95, 98% men of color. And of that, probably like 93% of that are African-American men. So understanding their unique journey as men of color in this society that has contributed to who they are presently and how they're showing up. So knowing their history, knowing the journeys that they've made, not just themselves, but their parents and their parents before them, and how all of that fits into who they are as men. Also knowing their place, like how do they, primarily African-American men, low-income men living in urban communities, how are they viewed in this world? Like, what's their place? The value that they understand is placed on them, but more importantly, the value that they place on themselves. And sometimes getting them to work through those issues that they that create trauma for them in terms of, fathers not being worthy, fathers not caring enough about their kids, like the negative narratives that have been foisted on them that they begin to internalize. We recognize that we have to help them combat that and form their own narratives that help identify and solidify their value and their self-esteem in this society. And lastly is their purpose. Like all of our dads know that they have unique talents and gifts that they can use to positively change their lives, their families, their communities. Oftentimes it's buried beneath years and years and decades of trauma and negative experiences. And so how do we get them to unearth those talents and use their power based on knowing their identity, knowing their value, and knowing their purpose in this world to really affect change for themselves and those around them. And so our partnership with Cross started because after our first year implementing, this was a 5-year pilot program. After our first year of implementing the program, like many of us, we jumped right into, okay, we got all these fathers in the room. We got to help them be better fathers. We got to understand why they're not showing up, or if they're showing up, why they're not showing up in the right way, helping them build their skills around fatherhood, helping them develop better relationships with their mothers. Like we were all in on fathering and co-parenting as that's the focus of this program. And what we heard repeatedly from fathers throughout that time was, what about me? Like that was their question back to us. Forget my role as a father, forget my responsibilities as a father and a co-parent, but what about me as an individual who's hurting, who needs support? And what we realized is we needed some way to help those dads deal with that first and foremost. Deal with the injured man or the hurt man that's in front of us, or the man who's strong but wants to get stronger and be directed in terms of how he uses his strength. How do we help them identify who they are and focus on that as a foundation for then layering on their fathering role and their role as co-parents? And so that's where our partnership with CROSS, the Center for Research on Psychological Self-Sufficiency, came in, because their approach was around that individual. Like, how does that individual develop the psychological self-sufficiency, which I call it like the scientific term for hope. But how do they develop that hope within themselves, that they can face the barriers that are inevitably going to be in their way, but also have the wherewithal to overcome those barriers? And if we help those dads get grounded in being able to do that, then we can begin to work on and layering on things around their fathering role and their co-parenting role. And once we did that, after the first year in bringing in CROSS and working with that, training our staff on their transforming impossible into possible curriculum, and I know Dr. Hong and Dr. Lewis are going to go more into that, we saw tremendous uptake, not only in retention, but also in what fathers were getting out of the program, because they felt heard, they felt valued. It didn't feel transactional, like I got to get you in a better place so you can do right by your kids. It was about them first and foremost, that then led to their ability to do things with their children. And so in 2017, we implemented the TIP curriculum, the Transforming Impossible into Possible, and we continued our evaluation work with our evaluation partner at the time. And what we settled on, like our equation for this is, we can do a lot of skill building with dads, and that competence is important, like building their skills around whether it's executive skills functioning, whether it's their fathering role and their co-parenting role. We can do a lot of that. But unless we give them the confidence to be engaged, unless we help them realize that they have what it takes to actually do this, we're not going to be successful. We're not going to get as far as we want. And so for us, our winning formula is like the competence of, skills with the confidence that they have within them is what equals success. Because we have many fathers who sit on the sidelines, who don't jump in, who don't participate, not because they don't know what to do. They don't have the confidence because society, and many times, the people around them have told them for a long time that they shouldn't be involved, that they can't be involved, they're not worthy of being involved. And so it's easy for them to check out when they don't have that confidence, when they don't have that positive reinforcement. And we realized that our work with Loyola was to help give them that confidence and marry that with all the skill development that we wanted to do, that equals the success that we want them to have and that we've been able to see in this program. So I'll stop right there for now. And I know we're going to get more into the science behind all of this with Dr. Hong, and then Dr. Lewis is going to come behind and share some of the results from the study that we did over our 5 years of programming.
Thank you so much, Ed. Ed is a pioneer and a great leader and a visionary who's brought all of us together. And so wanted to thank Ed. And this is a great, I'm very humbled by the previous panel discussion. So I don't know how best to present our materials aligned with the theme and the spirit of the conference. So just please bear with me. I'll do my best to add to what Ed has been able to describe of the coming together of a great program in Chicago with the vision of serving, upstreaming the strengths of fathers to change the place and the system under which our fathers are constantly and with strength and wisdom to fight the fight to protect our children and our families. So for my coming together with Ed, when you saw the date earlier of about 2017 was when prior to that was about 15 years of working in the community, coming from St. Louis, north side of St. Louis, Ferguson and Wellston area, of uncovering the theory that we call psychological self-sufficiency, purposely termed to use the self-sufficiency jargon that we know that is policy driven in the United States in the context of our social welfare policy and workforce development. At the same time, what we learned about how our community participants define success, the wisdom that is not is so much that it is outside of us, but it's outside within us, that how we define success is switching these Oftentimes there are structural systemic barriers, but also those that are internalized, that are living within our day-to-day operation as barriers that we carry. So some of them are internal barriers. So those all together, how do you take the barriers and switch to hope in the context of employment? Was what I was able to learn through a series of focus groups, primarily in the African-American communities in St. Louis, where I was able to bring the wisdom to the South Side and West Side of Chicago to test this dynamic between the barriers to hope, and how do you kind of use that as a muscle to keep moving forward to reach the goals, particularly in the context of welfare to work or workforce development, was this economic self-sufficiency as the outcome. So we focused on this barrier to hope process. And earlier, some of the panelists were talking about quality measures and how do we even talk about upstreaming. This was exactly what the wisdom that had been shared from the community members using a participatory or community-based participatory action research to so that this is not a theory that is pushed back down to the community, but it is something that already exists in the community that we were able to bring out from the strengths that are already there to kind of unleash into the openness of possibilities. So this is a theory that you see these series of theories in the context or series of items that are in the context of welfare or workforce development: physical mental health barriers, labor market exclusion barriers, childcare, human capital, and soft skills barriers were identified by our participants as key barriers that limit our ability to keep moving forward to reach our goal of economic self-sufficiency or finding a job and leaving public assistance in the context of our social policy. And now you see this hope piece, which is what Ed talked about. How do you kind of unleash that already exists within you, but also bring towards you the things that might be out there, to call it hope and make sure that you can take those steps forward to reach that outcome for yourself, for your family, for your community. So goal-oriented pathways and psychological empowerment were two components we learned, and self-worth, self-perceived capability were the items under which the psychological empowerment kind of was the overarching theme of, and also goal-oriented pathway and consisted of self-motivations and utilizing skills and resources and goal orientation. So this is a theoretical framework we used, and meeting Ed at the time was well fitting with the person, place, and what we're kind of thinking about earlier of going from the person, who am I, to my place, where I am as a father, but also my purpose, my power of kind of how do we impact the world. It was well fitting in that context of the Power Fathers design and the vision. So this is what we then the quality measures, as we talked about earlier, were these those were turned into surveys. The qualitative surveys from focus groups were turned into surveys to look at multiple time points over to see how these hope scores and the barrier scores decreasing, hope scores increasing, kind of manifested in this kind of the shaded area of the yellow shaded area of psychological self-sufficiency growing over time, as we had seen in the workforce development context. But the next slide will show us how we translated that into seeing the fathers kind of seeing it towards becoming a better father, as they saw for themselves what success means. What does a successful father look like? How can I participate on my own terms, at my own pace? Who I am as a father, although there might be all these different kinds of barriers and the negativity and then oppression and systemic dissing of who I am as a powerful father. But against all those odds, I am pushing forward with my desire to be a better father on my own terms, and with a lot of things happening around me. But this is a goal, not employment in this context, as we were able to translate. It's a fatherhood goal that we wanted to kind of translate to, rather than employment in this context. So it's no longer employment hope and employment barriers, it's fatherhood hope and fatherhood barriers in the same context of trying to reach that goal outcome of being a better father on my own terms as an African-American fathers who are powerful, who are amazing, as having weathered through so much, but still thriving. So that's the kind of the framework that Ed was able to lay out for us to kind of bring some of our earlier learnings into just doing it together, all ground up, all over again in this partnership. So you can see the theory of changes, the overall PSS score increasing, PSS psychological self-sufficiency, that's in the context of fatherhood, increasing would lead to increase in fatherhood outcomes. That would be to have better childhood outcomes, but also becoming a better father, strengthening of identities, and also father involvement were some of the things that we were looking at. So that translation of fatherhood barriers to fatherhood hope was the process that we had engaged in the earlier part of our partnership. And Ed also mentioned that this is somewhat theory informed, but I would humbly say that it is community informed, community embedded, and community driven framework. So it is theory, but it is truly a community theory of showcasing what wisdom that we have used over many generations to survive and thrive in the way that we have kind of figured out. That's part of our DNA. So this is it's not a theory of an academic, but it's one that is kind of already living the living truth of our community that we wanted to kind of help invigorate, not teach them to teach to them, but to kind of bring out of them that it's part of our DNA. That's kind of our approach to kind of say, we all have it. We're common human beings of knowing how to bring out our best. And how do we do that is by going to the wisdom that we have learned in the community through adapting it to the Power of Fathers goals using the PSS or psychological self-sufficiency framework. So the translation that Ed talked about of the tip for fatherhood, that we were using it sort of to adapt the workforce development context of PSS, psychological self-sufficiency, barriers to hope. And so the tip is the programmatic part or version, name for PSS, transforming impossible, the barriers, to possible, the hope. So basically impossible to possible is the barriers to hope, the PSS theory. But how do we do that in the context of fatherhood? What we're doing together with Power Fathers to kind of embed it in a more fully adapted and customized version of that is fitting for Power Fathers, using the strengths of Black father identity, and then the roots of our success, and the vision that we can have to uplift our community and upstreaming it for system change. And liberation and equity work. So that is the kind of the broader vision that we brought together. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Dara Lewis to continue on with our introducing our evaluation work and the results.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Hogg. And so I just want to just go back just a little bit, just to, I guess, sort of acknowledge give honor where honor is due, and thanking the fathers who, from a researcher standpoint, was exciting, and I learned so much from the fathers in this process, who informed the development of the tip for fatherhood, and ultimately drove the curriculum, particularly in the area of helping us develop what the barriers to them were. And so using that as the framework for how we both developed the curriculum components, but then built it out. And so just wanting to certainly share that with you here. But just moving into our evaluation. So we had a lot going on. It was like an organism, a lot of parts moving. And so we were working on the curriculum development as we're also working on the program evaluation. And so the purpose of our evaluation of this program was to assess the implementation of the program and its program goals from 2018 to 2021. So we, again, it was a 5-year pilot, but we did the evaluation work for about 3.5 years. And so again, thinking about the implementation, we wanted to look at how the program was working and what could be done to improve the program sort of in real time as much as possible. So feedback from the staff, the fathers were used, mostly driven by fathers' needs to make implementation changes throughout the program. And in terms of looking at the outcomes, we wanted to determine how outcomes were being achieved, if they were being achieved according to our program goals, and then how they were accomplishing that.
Dara, you muted yourself.
Thank you. Too many things happening at one time. But the program goals looking at improvements to father-defined life outcomes, improving father situations, improving fathers' relationships with their kids, improving co-parenting relationships, improving partner organizations, engagement practices, sharing engagement practices to improve broadly programs and services serving fathers, addressing policies and systems, and then ultimately amplifying the voices of our fathers as self-advocates. So no small task that we were assigned to, but we did our best. So we took a mixed methodology design, just wanting to hear both what was happening and what we're learning and what was the story that we could tell, right? So we used both individual interviews with staff fathers, program partners, administrators, and then also administrative data that was collected from case notes to reports. We had survey data that include our PSS surveys, and then relationship measures for the relationship of fathers with their children and with their co-parents. And so over that course of time, our unduplicated count of dads was about 309. So there were, to be clear, fathers that carried over cohorts that stayed in the program for multiple cohorts at a time, but the unduplicated count of dads was 309 dads, primarily from the south and west sides of Chicago, as we talked about earlier. So just to give a snapshot of the fathers that were served, again, 88% were Black or African American. They were between, for the most part, half or more were between the ages of 16 to 39. Many or most earned less than $20,000 a year. And the majority of our dads were non-resident fathers, and half were on probation or parole, with an average number of children of 2. So there was a lot that we could say over 3.5 years, but I just really wanted to boil it down into what were the key findings based on each of the program goals. So here I want to shift our thinking about the goal, as stated, was to improve, but then we also saw that there was value in seeing both support and improvement, right? So maintenance is not a bad thing, and maintenance is sometimes necessary, particularly when we're talking about the diversity of fathers served. So you have fathers who may or may not have access to their kids. Maybe there's child welfare system involvement and contact is limited. They could be maybe in a halfway house transitioning back. And so again, maybe more contact isn't what is possible. So just thinking about, again, maintaining a good relationship is as valuable as seeing the improvement, right? So the way that we think about measuring what we want to count as a positive outcome has to sort of change to adapt to what fathers are experiencing. So again, if we look at father-defined life outcomes, significant to us was the focus of the program on goals and goal setting, right? Both their personal goals and goals related to parenting and co-parenting. And so 70% of our dads said that the program helped them to both set and meet the goals that they had set for themselves. So, and then average 20% increased their PSS score. So again, thinking about their motivation and ability to then set a goal for themselves and be able to move toward that goal despite the barriers that they're facing. So again, we found that the components that supported the achievement of those goals and the progress, we could almost put this in reverse order. There was peer-to-peer support. Dads in the program now will tell you that the group session is everything to them, right? The support that they had from just seeing other fathers who are in situations, whether they're dads that are like them or dads that they think are different from them, but finding the commonality of experiences and struggles and challenges, and having a place to then have that support where they don't have other places to be supported. And so in addition to that, there was the intensive case management and coaching that is provided, and then the goal-directed curriculum that was developed by them for them was key in helping them to, again, to set and achieve the goals that they set for themselves. So key learnings in terms of what we learned as a program was that the fathers were much more successful when they were able to focus on their needs first before addressing the parenting and the co-parenting concerns, right? So they had to first get sort of settled in where they are and grounded in their own identity and self-worth before then being able to then help the other people around them. And then we also saw that, you know, as dads were setting goals, that it took, you know, often more time than the program allowed for them to complete. And so when we see, you know, dads who continue from cohort to next cohort, they're able to have more time to then address those goals that may take a lot longer time to achieve. And again, we saw that mentoring and coaching was key and effective in helping them to achieve those goals, as opposed to thinking about a traditional case management model where, you know, dad is told what to do and how to get there. And so this approach has allowed them to set the course for themselves and then, you know, hold themselves accountable along with their case managers in reaching their goals. In terms of their relationships with their kids, we found 82% said that relationship improved. The time spent with kids increased. 94% of dads said that increased. So again, we learned that those things that also supported their relationship with kids was having that peer-to-peer support, the case management, and then the curriculum also encouraged them and providing them with more tools, again, to be more and to show up more for their kids. And so the key thing that we learned is that, you know, they engage more with their kids when they feel better about themselves, going back to the identity and self-worth piece, that has to be a priority. And number 3, in terms of co-parenting relationship, 88% that it said that it improves or maintained while in the program. So again, those same components that we discussed helped to support that development. And then again, we learned that the co-parenting relationship in particular is very slow and incremental, right? There are many factors that affect what can change that can happen or the strengthening of that relationship. So to be patient and, and to not give up in terms of trying to support that. And then problems that are father only serving need to find ways to try to engage co-parent. In terms of number 4, support for changes in engagement practices, right? So we had to think about the collaborative was able to develop an assessment tool that was used by organizations. And so in that tool, they were able to assess their strengths, weaknesses, and their opportunities to be more, not even father friendly, to be more father focused in how they approached family strengthening work, right? And so the assessments from those organizations were shared across the collaborative that they could use and continue on and develop and grow out their own father engagement practices to embed those within their organizations and their work. And for goal number 5, sharing the engagement practices more widely to improve system, through programs and services and organizations. Again, in addition to developing this program model, and also the curriculum was developed to support that work. And so this work was also expanded from sort of the community level work into, you know, Chicago Public Schools, into Cook County Department of Corrections, to see those programs expand as well. And key finding number 6, addressing the policies and systems that adversely impact father engagement. And so they developed a policy agenda to address those policies, and in particular, looking at, of course, child support, custody visitation, and access to services, child welfare system, and housing. And number 7, last but not least, was amplifying the voices of the fathers, right? Trying to give them not only a place within the research, but a place within these larger tables where decisions are being made about things that affect them or adversely affect their ability to show up in their families. And so things like during COVID, a virtual town hall meeting was conducted to bring in the voices of the fathers to express to providers the challenges they were facing, the services that they needed, right, to bring those things together. So there's just one example of things that this collaborative did. In addition, there was COFI, which is Community Organizing and Family Issues, an organization in Chicago working to train fathers in like community organizing, right, to again, allow them, show them, teach them, and then show them how to use their voice for community benefit, for benefits of their family, for benefits of them as fathers. And so going from here, this, I had to boil down about, 3.5 years into this short presentation, but there is more that we could share. But just thinking about future opportunities for research. I mean, one is also working towards the validation of the fatherhood PSS work and looking at program fidelity, program model fidelity for this work. Huge to our work and conversation has been about the co-parenting relationships, working on ways to strengthen those and how to engage co-parents in this work. Because again, fathers do not operate in isolation alone. We're within family structures, and so have to support both sides. And certainly fathers' engagement when we're dealing with largely non-resident fathers is impacted by the involvement of the other co-parent. Right? So being aware that we have to look at ways to strengthen that, to be able to strengthen father engagement. And then also looking at how, as men connect to who they are and build their self-worth and connect to their identity as fathers, how that can impact violence prevention. So these are just 3 strains of research. There are many more that could be followed. And I don't know if we have time. I don't
think we're going to have time. We can drop the video into the chat though for folks.
Yes. Thank you so much. So I will hand it back to you, Dr. McGregor, for the Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you all sharing this wonderful, powerful program with us. I really, I have a lot of questions. I'm not going to take a privilege and ask my questions first. I'm going to stick to the program. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to ask for those who may have a question, maybe raise your hand. I have several questions that were put in the chat. I'm going to start with those. I want to actually start with 2 program questions, and then I'm going to jump back to the actual first question. So one question was, how are fathers incentivized in this program? And can you also answer what some of the competence building activities were that you were able to do? So 2 program questions to start off.
So in terms of incentivizing them, they were incentivized in several ways. For participation, on a quarterly basis, they received financial incentive if they came to a certain number of classes or cohort sessions and continued on that. We wanted to recognize that they were given their time and that they had real needs, and there was an opportunity cost to them being there versus the ability to make money in other places. We also covered transportation costs for dads if that was needed to reduce barriers. We provided childcare support if that was needed to incentivize dads. We also had lots of, before COVID, we did activities with our dads. So just fun things to get them out and about. We had activities that were dad specific, but also for the family, including the co-parents, where ways of just encouraging and thanking them for their participation and continuing to build their own community with each other. Those were other ways that we use activities as an incentive, but also an appreciation, a token of appreciation for their involvement in the program. But we also incentivize their feedback. So when dads participated in our focus groups around, evolving the curriculum or just how the program is going and ways of improving the program, we recognize that the folks on the one side of the table were being paid to collect that feedback and ask the questions, that the fathers should be paid for providing that feedback because it costs them time. It costs them, their energy, and we want to value their experience the same way we value our own expertise, put a dollar amount on what our opinions are worth. We want to, provide some equity in that transaction for the dads as well, in providing incentives for them and remuneration to acknowledge their, for their time and commitment. In terms of the second question, please, Dr. Phil or Dara, please chime in because you helped develop the curriculum, but a lot of the activities in the curriculum were focused on how they build, that self-esteem, that self-identity. So, we start with like who they are as fathers, like who am I, and writing an essay that deals with their journey and unearthing, truths about themselves and sharing as an empowerment tool of understanding how they've gotten to be where they are. One of the most powerful elements in that phase of the curriculum is the forgiveness letter that they have to write. Whether it's forgiving themselves for choices or things that they've done, forgiving others as well. Like that has always been one of the more powerful sessions that help dads sort of come to terms with and deal with a lot of the issues that may be holding them back from their being their best selves and putting them in a situation where they can get the support to go through that. And then a lot of the other activities in that, from goal setting, it's like, don't just identify the goal, but map the process it's going to take to complete that goal. What are the steps that are going to be necessary? And how can we support you in completing those steps? So again, it's more of teaching the dads how to fish versus fishing for them, where we are supporting their ability to do the goal setting, the goal planning, identifying the supports and services that they will need. And our support is there to help connect them to them. So it's been very empowering, very empowering in that sense for them to be able to identify these goals for themselves and then get the support that they need to achieve.
I know you gave an opening to Dr. Phil. I don't know if he wants to comment, but certainly you're welcome to if you'd like. But I mean, I thought your answer was pretty thorough, and I appreciate hearing a lot of some of the same issues that were discussed in the opening panel in terms of that CBPR, community-based or community-driven lens, thinking about program sustainability, how you create equity in a program with some of the objectives and the features that you discussed. I think that's really important, and some of the things that I think should be a part of an evaluation lens, and it sounds like it was. So thanks for that. The next question.
I just wanted to add to that.
Yes, please.
Sorry, and just in terms of like building confidence, I just wanted to say it's more than just the curriculum. I think it has a lot to do with the program design. So much of the program and the modifications were driven by the father's needs and the father's, what they expressed, right? What they were going through and their challenges. So then also shaping the program to where they feel like they have not only a part of it, but their opinion matters, that they're valued. So from even the program design to, like I said, the group sessions, the case management, to where they feel like the program is invested in them as well. So I think that's really key in terms of developing that confidence.
Thank you for adding that. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then Dr. Rodriguez, I'm gonna come to you. So one of the earlier questions we got was, why are fathers not intentionally and authentically engaged in the early childhood space? I wanted to give you all the opportunity to talk about that a little bit, just based on your experiences. It's not directly, coming out of your program, but given what you've been doing and what you've been able to achieve, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. I think I heard Mr. Davies say a bit about stigma and some other things, but any thoughts on what some of these barriers are in terms of intentionally and authentically engaging fathers in this early childhood space?
Yeah, I think it all starts with our individual and in some of our collective mindset around how we view fathers. fathers. And so, especially in this space of education, you know, culturally, historically, just even as just, you know, beyond different races, we've always seen, you know, motherhood as sort of that nurturing component for the growth and development of children in certain ways. And if you divide the ledger, education was on one side of the ledger, and you know, the development of the mind, and like on the other side for dads, it was physical, you know, like teaching to be an athlete, or whatever we mean by when we say teaching them to be a man. You know, those fell into two different categories. And so we have just bought into this, you know, misguided narrative for far too long, that education is a space where mothers provide a lot of the leadership and support and nurturing. And so it's uncoupling, like dismantling that narrative. And many fathers buy into it as well. And so one that starts with that mindset that that's their space, not ours. But then what that does is create this bias within each of us that, you know, that isn't the space for guys, or teachers in the education system begin to adopt an orientation towards mothers for that space and exclude fathers. Like, I'm a non-custodial father, and right before this call, I was on camera reading to my daughter's class, you know, but that's not always the norm, and that's not, and even when I do it, I try and downplay the fact that I'm showing up, because the teachers respond in a way as if I'm a unicorn for being on camera and doing something that I know many other parents, you know, do for their children, but because I'm the father and not the mother, it's seen as like this unique thing. So we gotta help start moving past the bias that we have that unintentionally, in some ways very intentionally, keeps fathers outside. We tell them and show them that they're not welcome here, they're not needed here. And then that reinforces a mindset for them as well, that they don't need to show up, you know, and so they choose not to. But even beyond that, we gotta also get past this notion of what masculinity is and what it needs to be in man. Like, it's just as important for me to take my kids to school as it is for me to take my son to the barbershop to get a haircut. That's just as much being a man, reading to my daughter, you know, versus, you know, picking out the next like rap song on listen or anything like that. And so we have also culturally given leeway to be in certain spaces and duck out of certain spaces, because that's not what really being a man is about. And so again, it's ripping up those old narratives that definitely play out in the early childhood and continue on from early childhood through a young person's adulthood, you know, young adulthood into adulthood. These dynamics of what's the father's role versus the mother's role.
Well, you're getting a lot of amens and right-ons and everything else in the chat. So I think you have really knocked it out the park in terms of what some of the challenges are. And I think that really resonates, particularly with people who are doing similar programs, because they're seeing some of the same things and are having to challenge those narratives with just the reality of the situation. It's funny, I started thinking about the whole donuts for dads. Without fail, those schools do that, you know, and I almost wonder if there's some, you know, some regional or national evaluation of the impact of that, because other than a quick sugar high from that donut and that juice,
right?
You know, what engagement happens between school staff, administrators, the dads themselves. But I really appreciate your thoughtful answer on that. I'm going to transition to Dr. James. I really appreciate the questions coming in the chat. I think we have some support for gathering questions that don't get answered and collecting them and maybe getting them to the presenters later. As you all can imagine, that was going to happen, sort of baked into the process of not having enough time. But I'm going to acknowledge Dr. Rodriguez here and give him the floor to ask his question. Go ahead, Doc.
Dr. McGregor, Mr. Davis opened up too many questions. I had only one or two or three, but he added like 55 to it. First, I want to go back just on the evaluation. Dr. Hong, if you could help me out on the items. I helped out Los Angeles Maternal, Child, and Adolescent, and they used the PRAMS, which is a national survey, but in it, they never sorted out certain populations. And 2 years later, the effect of father involvement with young mothers in this program, prenatal, it was all prenatal. And then 2 years later, how many of those mothers who did not have a healthy relationship with the father had their child in child welfare? And I felt like it was not only a missed opportunity for possibly intervention or prevention, but also the findings. So Dr. Chow and I sat back and we hashed it up later on about how they could build up fatherhood programs in maternal and child and adolescent health. But in your program, you all use 3 different elements of services. And I'm just curious, what were the motivation factors for the fathers to stay engaged? And I think you already talked about the incentives, but I'm talking about the personal motivation. And how did you measure? Because Mr. Davis, when you mentioned the narratives, the stories, how did you measure change from that? Like, what instrument did you utilize? Because I'm looking on page 20 and I can't find how were you able to evaluate the effectiveness so that other people can learn from what you all are doing and replicate it and share it, whether it's in Ohio or Iowa or Texas, because I think that what you all are doing is phenomenal.
Thanks for your question. All right, who wants to jump in here?
I'll let Dr. Hong or Dr. Lewis start. He started with the evaluation piece, and I can round out anything else. So I just want to say thanks to Dr. Rodriguez, attended his conference that they host just a few weeks ago, and our staff got a lot out of it. So thanks for being a leader in this space.
Dr. Hong, if you didn't want, I'll go.
Yeah, please, Dr. Lewis, go ahead, lead us off, and then I'll just chime in as needed. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you for that question. Change is always a hard thing to measure, right? It's so subjective and it's so hard to pinpoint. So I do think that was the benefit of the mixed method design, right? So you could have the narrative, the story, along with the data. And so in terms of sort of the survey data that we collected, it's the parenting and co-parenting scales, the PICs, we call them, and relationship tracker data points are specifically what we use to measure father's perception of his relationship with his kids and the co-parents. And then the relationship tracker sort of tracked, time spent with kids, amount of time and interactions with the co-parent to be able to see, did those things change over time? And so again, coupled with the actual narratives from the fathers about what's happening in those relationships gave us more confidence of saying that there was a change occurring. Does that help? Or Dr. Hong, did you have anything to add?
I'll just add just one piece of the process-based measure that we used was called PSS that we introduced. And that's when the father, like Dr. Lewis was earlier saying, these are tools. And again, the curriculum content were tools to invite our fathers to be honored and respected. They participated in identifying for the researchers as collaborators to kind of lift their barriers as not something that they're ashamed of, but these are barriers that we all have as fathers. And these are, we kind of approached it as a lift up or serve up our fathers in a culture of brotherhood where people felt safe to be, that's connects to the motivation question too, but people felt safe to be part of it in ways that we can share anything in the group. And it goes nowhere other than just the people who are listening in the group. And that really made it so that, and also participating in helping to identify barriers, not in a shameful way, but as anchors from which we will develop our hope together as collective, group of fathers who are now proud fathers, who are proud of having done this or that, but those are not all in vain. They didn't go out being wasted, but they're all adding to the whole of how we are contributing to being a better father. This is a process rather than in a Hollywood version of a father that we're living up against. And that's not what we're about. It. We're honoring every bit of those steps that we've taken as fathers to be the steps forward as steps before the next steps. And so that's kind of where people felt like we're part of the group as brothers.
Thanks. And just to quickly add, some of the other, I know Dr. Rodriguez is asking about how, like, what kept fathers coming back. Each other. they kept each other coming back. They felt they had a safe space to be vulnerable, to let down their guard. We had fathers who come in this space, they hold each other accountable from the way they talk about, their co-parents when they come in this space. If someone's using the wrong language or, they're just the wrong energy, the dads in the group are the ones that redirect their energy, but also try and be solution oriented. It's like, hey, let me pull you aside and talk with you offline about what you're going through and how we can support you. So we heard time and time again that it just gave them that space to really grapple with these issues in a safe place where they can be vulnerable. Part of our feedback also came from co-parents. We did focus groups with co-parents of the dads, and they spoke to the changes that they saw in the fathers who participate in the group. And these were sometimes co-parents that weren't in an intact relationship. So, we learned that the way dads were showing up looked differently once they engaged in the program, which is a lot of what we heard in the program that we piloted in Cook County Jail as well, in terms of changes in behavior in the dads, lower incidence of behavioral problems for dads participating in the program, better support in, giving them a focus to do their time, more engagement with their families on the outside, because we know that they're doing the time with the dads. And so we did a lot of work to make sure that those families were supported as well, and bringing that all along together. I put our contact information in the chat. I know we're going to do formally the host will send out the questions, but if folks want to follow up with their questions directly to us, I put our contact information in the chat, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation, the dialogue, especially around how we want to replicate not only what we do, but learn from others, but ways that we can replicate this work across the country to have greater outcomes for individuals and communities.
Thanks, Mr. Davies. As you all may have seen, this breakout room will close in about a minute. Glad you mentioned that your contact information was in the chat. We'll definitely, I think we have the resources to gather the questions. Dr. Hong also put the video that you weren't able to get to at the end in the chat, so that should be there as well. I just want to thank you all again. You're doing some really amazing work. I live in the space of behavioral health and the criminal legal system. So when I saw that stat about 50% of the fathers being on probation and parole, I really got activated around maybe some things that are happening with that group, and sort of what they bring to a program like this in terms of challenges that they may bring, trauma, so on and so forth, but also strengths and assets to the program. So